Hi, and welcome back. Today we are returning to our first female, Isra. And when we last left Isra, she was in prison having her hair dyed purple, a bad shade of purple. And she was remembering that fateful day when she plowed down her husband with her car. Um, Isra was really fun to write because Isra is very determined, very strategic, and I'm not strategic at all. Not at all. I mean, not in the sense that I'd want to run my partner down with a car, but certainly I could learn a little bit of from her strategy because this lady does not miss a beat. And the year is still 2003. So let's see what Isra is up to today. Despite being in prison with freshly colored purple hair, when I woke, I was smiling. Part of me was horrified at this, but I realized I was a woman with no regrets. If given the chance, I would kill him again. And if that made me a bad person, then I was a bad person. I wondered if he would do the same. If time was turned back, would he have married me, used me, betrayed me as he did? Something told me he had no regrets either. I wonder how karma would catch us in the future. I hope it caught that fat thieving bastard first. Regardless, I would never physically harm another human being. Murder was not a behavior I intended to repeat. Despite feeling no remorse, I was not proud of my actions. This morning, like every morning since my unfortunate incarceration 8 years ago, I woke before the sun and the posse of roosters calling out to each other. I woke pondering my life and how I came to be in this place, lying on a hard surface with badly dyed violet hair. I concluded my first mistake was my choice in a marriage partner. My second mistake was failing at suicide. Perhaps being in jail is karma getting a head start. If I did not call him by name, it was as if he never existed. And if he never existed, I was not in jail. I would be lying in my own bed, my comfortable bed, in my own home, nestled in between sheets that smell like the freshness of forgotten youth. When I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine it. The warmth of my body clinging to the linens loosely draped around me. But as soon as my sleeping frame luxuriously stretched out to resume a new position, my torso contorted, shrieking in discomfort. Even in my dreams, I could not make my sleep in prison comfortable. My husband's name was Iran. I stopped referring to him by name when I discovered he was a useless liar. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. I would erase the day we met. Had I not attended that stupid conference, I would not be in this predicament. I kept asking myself, what if? What if? But there was no looking back, only forward. I promised myself there would be no mistake when I remarried. And I would remarry. But this time, I would be smarter about it. It was never my intention to go to prison. I was supposed to die. Had my husband's fat body not been discovered when it was, I would have gotten away with it. Unfortunately, one cannot dictate the timing of an entire sequence of events. Everything else had gone according to plan. I did not, however, anticipate the police coming to my house to deliver the terrible news of my husband's accident the very same evening. When I did not answer, their fists pounding on the door, they forced their way into my home and found me upstairs, slowly making my escape. Other than the line of drool coming out of my mouth, I looked peaceful enough. In court, the policeman testified that the first thing I asked them when they shook my shoulders to determine if I was alive was if they could smell the flowers. The court erupted into gales of laughter, as if it was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard. Even the judge barely managed to withhold a smirk. Throughout the trial, I frequently smelled the flowers, although never as strong as they had been that evening. It was their fragrance my brain held onto as I tried to block out the stench of prison. The unimaginable smells that filtered deep into the nostrils and stuck. There were some things about prison you could never escape. I was sentenced to life in prison, which was even longer than it sounded. I wanted to die and cursed myself for the millionth time for not dying. I had read about prison. I had seen the movies. The visions that always stuck with me were the vacant eyes of people and their moving bodies dead inside. I was now one of them, but I would have rather been one of the cockroaches that roamed around the building. At least cockroaches were free to come and go as they pleased. I was awake when I came to this conclusion. I was awake and watched a cockroach walk across a room full of sleeping bodies. Its tiny feet carried its large, ugly brown body over oblivious human mountains. It walked alarmingly close to a sleeping girl's face. I thought she would wake to the tiny sounds of the feet approaching her ear, but she did not wake up. She slept on, and the cockroach sauntered into her ear without so much as a brush from her hand to deter its entry. Its big, ugly body squeezed its way in. I stayed awake for the remainder of the night, waiting for the cockroach to leave the inner cave of her ear. But it did not, and I could not sleep for fear it was waiting for me to rest so it could permanently take residence in my ear. When the sun finally decided to rise, I realized to my horror that I had fallen asleep and then woke to the sound of tiny footsteps marching deep inside the inner sanctum of my ear. I dug my finger into my ear, terrified I would frighten it into my brain, but I could not contain the urge to dig the cockroach out from where it did not belong. Madness loomed around my eyeballs, and I shook my head in an attempt to dislodge this disgusting creature from my ear. When I stopped slamming my hand against the side of my head, there were a few curious faces staring not so discreetly at the ruckus on my sleeping mat. I wanted to scream, "There is a cockroach in my ear!" The footsteps stopped. Suddenly, I was not certain if it was a dream or reality, because the girl whose ear I had watched the cockroach walk into was no longer among the other sleeping bodies. I reluctantly lay my head down. It was not time to rise for the day, so I attempted to decipher the truth about the whereabouts of the cockroach from the games my mind was playing. My eyes barely had time to shut when the cockroach came back. It stood before me, looked directly into my eyes, and said, "Don't worry, I won't go into your ear again. With a wink of its eye, it was off on its tiny feet in search of another ear to inhabit. Cockroaches are disgusting, ugly, ugly creatures, and I came to liken my own appearance to that of one, a cockroach with violet hair. I decided very quickly, within the first few days of my incarceration, that the only way I would to survive was to live in my head. For someone of my intelligence, this was not difficult. The world I created there was better than the world my eyes saw and what my nose smelled. My imagination saved me from that place, which I began to refer to as my temporary home. I shut out what I could not accept. There was a lot I could not accept. Any dirt, rodent, bug, I befriended. The warden, the officials, the guards who watched over us, and the other inmates I pretended to befriend. I never had so many friends. In prison, the evenings were the hardest. Vulnerabilities were unleashed in quiet moments shared in darkness. The muffled sobs of mothers yearning for abandoned children, their angered curses for lost loves, and the always mournful regrets of what could have been. The weight of the emotional blanket bearing down on our bodies was more unbearable than the heat and the smells. How could a room full of broken hearts be consoled? We lay awake praying to Buddha for sleep to come to us, to relieve us, if only temporarily, from the reality in which we live. When I shut my eyes, a blackness enveloped me. I preferred to have my eyes closed because it helped me to forget where I was. What I could not see, I could smell: moist, runny feces, strong urine, and stale sweat dripping from bodies crammed together tightly. If I had dwelled on my time spent incarcerated, it would have driven me mad. On the outside, I used to think the days went quickly. When I worked, I often wished there were more hours in a day so I could accomplish everything I needed to do. In prison, I began to wish there were fewer hours in the day, especially since my days were much the same. Routine in prison fostered a cloud of normalcy, its looming shroud building in size, waiting for the right moment to unleash tears of boredom. I was a prisoner to time. Each second dripped, squeezed from the unknown depths of eternity. There were days when I first arrived at the prison when I simply sat in the corner, shut my eyes, and counted. I wanted to see how high I could go before my brain mashed into oblivion. I did variations of this exercise to kill time. I counted my numbers, allotting 3 seconds in between each number. When I tired of this, I counted backwards from 1,000,000, because this was the figure my fat husband stole from me, a number that represented the crumbling of my existence. Reality in prison is set by the Department of Corrections that has guidelines with regards to our food, clothing, and housing. However, in practice, guidelines are meaningless. Corruption dictates reality. Looking around at the bodies crammed in my cell, I would be an idiot not to conclude that prison housing is a problem. The standard capacity, I was told, is set by a calculation that determines the minimum sleeping space in dormitory cells. My math mind loves the idea of calculating, And if this standard capacity for one inmate is equal to 1 meter in width and 2 meters and a quarter in length, someone is about as good as math as I was in choosing a husband. How many people are in here? I asked one of the girls in my cell. More than there should be. No shit, said one of the other women. I suspect we're beyond capacity. How fortunate to be one of them, I found myself thinking. I slept in a 10 by 8 dormitory with 16 other women. There was one public toilet in view, so we all share in the others' toilet experiences. And if there was a ceiling fan, that provided a little relief of all of the unwanted odors and the tropical heat that wafted through the stagnant air we breathed. I hope to hell it stunk. It stunk wherever my husband was, or that he'd been reborn as a pig and lived the remainder of his days covered in his own shit. The designer clothes I used to dream of were replaced by prison garb. My prison attire consisted of 2 sets of clothes per year, one traditional all-purpose loincloth, 2 pieces of underwear, and 1 towel every 2 years, whether I needed it or not. But because of the influx in prisoners, there was not enough underwear to go around, so the government issued an urgent request for the public to donate new and used undergarments. I did not mean to be ungrateful, but when I was handed my 2 new pairs, all I could think of was whose bottom had been in them before. I convinced myself that she must have been a very hygienic individual who had just purchased the underwear and only worn them once. I spent a long time intently gazing at the tiny pink floral print. I thought the flowers were pretty. As I slipped them on, the flowers came to life, and I was no longer wearing someone else's underwear. I was wearing a bottom of crocheted pink flowers. I really hated my dearly departed husband. As for the food, I miss the gorgeous red and green curries I used to indulge in daily. For the first 6 months of prison life, many of my dreams were of food. So vivid were the taste sensations, they came alive on my tongue, and my lips would tingle and my eyes would water from too many chilies. For dessert, I gorged on the sticky wetness of mango, licking remnants of its lushness from my finger. I would wake with my hands stuffed into my mouth, my dry mouth, and I wanted to sob. It took some time, but those dreams eventually stopped. I was not sure if it was because I had resigned myself to the fact it would be a while before I could eat like that, or if it was simply kinder on my psyche not to dream about what I could not have. Some of the women were fortunate to have family members who visited. Previously, these visitors had been allowed to bring food. But, of course, some idiot spoiled it by smuggling in drugs. I could not understand what possessed people to do something stupid like that, because it was only a matter of time before they get caught or the bribe money ran out. So visitors were no longer permitted to bring inmates foods. Great. After that, as an alternative, visitors were permitted to purchase food at a store located inside the prison. It was not as good of a meal as one that was prepared by the loving hands of relatives. But at least it was an option. The facility was also equipped with a kitchen, so traditional dishes could be prepared on site for inmates. My diet consisted of what the Department of Corrections assigned: 32 baht per day, which would give me rice and whatever side dish was being served. I hoped my bastard of a husband was starving in his next life. In actuality, it was a good thing I suffered from food poisoning prior to incarceration. It weaned me off one of my favorite foods, the yellow curry. After being so ill, I'd refused to eat any food that was yellow. No pineapple, no corn, and certainly no yellow curry. It was as if the poison from the yellow chicken curry had polluted my body, so it refused to ingest anything yellow from that day forward. To further instill my repulsion and commitment, I believed that Buddha should have been thanked for having me eat the poison food that ultimately led me to discover the truth about my no good husband. As for my health, I thanked my parents for my strong constitution. Beyond surviving the overdose during my time in prison, I, fortunately, did not require prison services, medical services. For those who did, there was a clinic where basic medical assistance was provided. For those who did, prisoners requiring medical treatment were transferred to nearby public hospitals. Anyone who required long term care was transferred to the only prison hospital facility near Bangkok. From what I witnessed and heard whispered among the other inmates, the main problems were AIDS and tuberculosis. I remember reading something about that. I wished I could remember something in comparison to the general Thai population. The infection rate of AIDS and TB was higher, 10 times higher among the inmate population than the general population. God, I really, really hated my dearly departed husband. I convinced myself there were worse places in the world, and while I knew that to be true, there was no comfort in being trapped in a place I did not want to be. I wanted to be in my own house, wearing my own clothes, and going to my old job with my life firmly on track to be a successful and wealthy businesswoman. My new existence permitted none of these things. I belonged to the state and was subject to what was budgeted for me. Many times I wish I had died that night. In prison, I was sectioned into tiny pieces, and each one fought to stay together, only to eventually fall miserably apart with no hope of coming back together. I wished I were dead like my dearly departed husband. I felt scared and lonely all the time, forever lost in a bottomless sewer of anger. It could have eaten me alive, but it soon passed, only to be replaced by self pity. Another unappealing facet to the many stages I was to pass through in the first years of my incarceration. I mourned the loss of my old life, but mostly I mourned what could have been. I mourned the death of my dreams. It was devastating, crippling. How could I mourn something that never was? I learned in those first few years that dreams were powerful illusions. I lived mine over and over in my imagination. With such frequency, they seemed real. In fact, for a time, they were even welcomed, especially since life was not progressing the way I had envisioned. The imaginary world was a powerful force to be reckoned with. I would never want to go up against a woman's imagination, especially not my own. I was good at imagining what should have been, what could have been. I was good at making the unfamiliar familiar. I had once basked in the envy of my pretend neighbors. Their existence had been real. I had felt their presence. When I grieved with a full heart, a heart that had lived my dream. I was sad about many things: the loss of a comfortable bed, beautiful food between my lips, a freshly fragranced body, my own money, and the independence that a good job brought. I did not mourn the death of my fat husband. I had to realize and accept that dreams change. When one dream does not work out as expected, there is no shame in modifying it. Perhaps it was time to change, to devise a more powerful, effective plan, one that would accomplish the task at hand. I used to always reevaluate my game plan, whether it was love or at work. I had forgotten the loss of this perspective and how to judge my life effectively. This was dangerous. Prison had taught me a new level of adaptability. This was a skill I otherwise would not have been acquainted with, a skill that would take me beyond what I could have previously reached. Of this I was certain. I had to learn that when the opportunity comes, it had to be seized without a second's thought. It was what would differentiate those who got what they wanted most and those who lost sight of what they truly desired. I tried to make the most of things, but my imagination got the better of me. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I could not. I imagined someone without a face. His body was a solid black mass of nothing distinct. I could see him crawling out from the hole in the ceiling and creeping over to kill me. I could feel the terror of being murdered swell from the depth of my stomach until it covered my limbs. I told myself this was not real and I was only dreaming. I opened my eyes and processed the space. The sleeping bodies of the other women piled around me. Their breathing and broken dreams flooded the room along with mine. Together, these dreams pooled in a sea of hopelessness. It helped momentarily. When I shut my eyes again, there were more solid black masses approaching me from different angles. The door to our cell was locked tight. There was no way anyone could get in. My mind acknowledged this fact, but chose to ignore it as I heard the door slowly creak open. The black masses were not coming for anyone else. They were coming for me. The silent footsteps stood before me, and they wrapped their brawny fingers around my throat. I woke, but the sensation of unwanted visitors lingered. It was sweltering. The relief of the evening breeze refused to come through the window. I knew the breeze existed because I could hear it talking to the trees. I wanted it to talk to me, to spread its arms through the window and talk to my face, but it refused. I knew the breeze was entering through the windows of the other cells because I could hear evidence of its presence elsewhere. Why was it ignoring me? Was I undeserving of even the wind? My eyes closed, but my fears would not release me. They stubbornly clutched onto me. Damn them, I wanted to sleep. When I was on the edge of sleep, fear visited me once again. I had to start over. This was how I spent my nights. There was a certain predictability to them. Although I was mindful of routine, I could not shake the power of fear rooted in my brain. My mind was always there, waiting to trick me as if it had nothing better to do. I continued to lie as I did every night, taking some comfort in the bodies pressed against me. There was no privacy, and the restless nights were the only times I was alone with my thoughts. Many nights I found my mind venturing back to my old life, and I yearned for it. It had not been perfect, but I was free. Living a lie with a fat, thieving bastard was better than I had thought. Until now, I had not realized how good I had it. Was this what I was supposed to learn from prison? That life was not perfect? That people and situations were not perfect? That nothing, no one was perfect? Was I to learn that it was how a person reacted to what life presented them that differentiated one individual from the next? That the key was to wrap your mind around life's obstacles and make it as good as it could be? When I realized I was the source of my own suffering and that I had the power to create a better reality for myself, everything started to come together. I stopped resenting my unsuccessful suicide attempt, and I knew I had to make my living hell the best it could be. I was never under the illusion that prison could be good, but I knew my existence could be better and that I needed more than my imagination to make it bearable. Prison brought out my more submissive side. I knew that I needed to play by the rules, obediently obliging whatever was expected. I knew that good behavior and a little luck were crucial to any possibility of an early release. I could not afford to have the other inmates or guards whisper about my odd behavior. My reaction to their visits by my cockroach would have to be controlled. I fought hard against the bugs. Bugs frequently visited me in my sleep, and I was not always convinced I was dreaming. I knew that I could not let anyone know what vexed me in the dark. No one could know about the talking cockroach that had violet hair like mine.